I am here with the world's strongest bodybuilder, the Rhino, Stan Efferding. He has actually helped me so much as a coach. It's unbelievable that I got him here. I'm hyped. I've been so hyped. I've been jumping around waiting for the minutes. I was like 58, 59. I was waiting for him to come on. Thank you, Stan, for jumping on. Super happy to have you.
Thank you, brother, and to your audience, Talofa, which is hello from American Samoa, which is my current place of residence out here on this tiny little blip of an island in the South Pacific Ocean. Some people might be familiar with the location of Fiji, but we're about 5 hours off the coast of New Zealand or Australia, in the middle of nowhere. It's a tiny little island. About if it were a rectangle, it'd be 4 miles by 20 miles. It's
Wow,
just a
it's
tiny little,
small.
about 77 square miles, small little place, volcanic island, beautiful place, obviously surrounded by ocean, and we got this big, huge volcanic cliffs covered with trees. It's been awesome. My wife was born and raised here, and we've got a little 10 and 12-year-olds, so we moved down here last summer to get them through school, and I've just been loving it. I drive around the island on a golf cart. The speed limit's 25 miles an hour here, so I get along pretty well, and I golf, and as much as I am hesitant to admit it, I picked up a little pickleball addiction, and so we play indoor pickleball here on the island, and I do a little swimming and a little training. So it's a tough life. So I appreciate you reaching out to me. Thank God for the internet and social media.
Yeah. Well, we got to keep you working a little bit. You can't just enjoy the island life. We got to keep you working a little bit. I actually have a little bit of experience with this, with the Samoan people because I tried to become a pro wrestler before I became an MMA fighter. I was like an obese teen. I felt I got into jiu-jitsu because I was in Athens, Greece. I really didn't. There was no pro wrestling, but I was in love with pro wrestling. I got a UFC tape by accident, and I was like, "Oh, this is pretty cool." So I started training jiu-jitsu. And then when I got the opportunity, my first chance, I was like, Mom, I'm not going to college. I'm sorry. I'm going to go become a pro wrestler. And I moved to Pennsylvania and I trained with Alpha the Wild. Trained and lived with Alpha the Wild Samoan from the Wild Samoans and his wife in their downstairs basement with other wrestlers for like 4 or 5 months. And then I moved back and it was like, I need to train MMA because I'm 5'9". And yeah, I was
Yeah. Oh, they
260. I
are.
got.
I'm the smallest person on the island. They are a huge, powerful people. They're obviously per capita, they're the number one represented population in the NCAA and NFL football. So it's pretty remarkable. There isn't a formal weightlifting program at any of the high schools. These kids are just naturally strong. Some of them do lift weights, of course, but they just play football and they're unbelievably powerful. I trained a bunch of them at the University of Oregon in the early to mid 90s, and they were all the same. Doesn't matter what you put them on, they were stronger than everybody else in the room without ever having done it before. It's pretty remarkable to see 300-pound Samoans running, very athletic, grow up playing volleyball and football, playing rugby with athleticism at that size and weight and speed. It's just not something you want to be on the other end of.
Oh, absolutely not. And there's just this. It's in that you could see like the way that their chest, their shoulders are wide and big, and when they throw punches, like I met a few of them that did MMA later on that were fighters, and when they would hit stuff, you just like, what is going to survive on the other end of that? Like whatever that hits, it doesn't matter what that is, it's going down
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah, we might touch on a little bit of genetics today with respect to both athleticism and diet. So they certainly have their own set of genes. It's very very interesting how that works.
Yeah, it is. But I want to start you off. I thought about something, and there was like something I didn't know much about you, and I saw this one kind of obscure podcast that was actually about your businesses, and like I had no idea that you had a telecommunications company. Like I know that you were on Shark Tank, and you had the cooler, I believe it's with the
Yep.
K. Um,
Yeah.
I know that you're in a gym and you're a trainer as well to many professional athletes and everyday people, which I find is still is amazing that you do both. But yeah, when I heard that, I was like, that's fantastic. I'm a bit of a business nerd, so this is like, I was like, oh, he's hitting off all the boxes here.
Yeah, personal training didn't pay the bills back in the 90s after college. Whenever I was a personal trainer in college and after college worked at box gyms and I was competing in bodybuilding, and so I thought that was going to be a career for me. But it was hard to make a living, and it can still be. We actually have a book that we write called "Making a Career, Building a Career in the Fitness Industry" that goes over what I've been able to do to build a career. But it took many, many years. So, back in the 90s, I realized I had to get a real job, and as most people who are personal trainers, as a sideline end up doing. And I was fortunate to have spent about 10 years working under a mentor of mine who was a real estate developer. And we built hundreds of units of multifamily properties, and we had cable and phone um, on our properties that we ran. And so I had a history of learning about that kind of thing. And so I started my own construction company. I bought and operated multifamily properties, and ultimately started a telecommunications company. And then when the real estate market collapsed, I moved into an engineering firm, which was kind of unique, but we were really kind of just chasing what was available in terms of government contracts at the time. And we were designing, not we, but we hired people to design baggage handling systems at the airports when they were retrofitting them as a result of 9/11. And then went on to do the cooler, as you know, and started the vertical diet and wrote ebooks and books and did online coaching and started a meal prep company. So I've worn a lot of hats. I've been a bit of an entrepreneur throughout my life, and I find that I've said in videos before that most successful athletes or bodybuilders have everything that they already need to be successful in business, because anybody who would commit that kind of time and discipline and consistency and hard work and the scheduling and all of that into an income producing venture could certainly do very well financially for themselves in business. Oftentimes they don't make that switch over, unfortunately, but at some point in your life, competing becomes the window of opportunity closes physically, and it's nice to have, kind of built yourself a list of habits that are beneficial for business as well.
I think it was like I believe like I think it probably was from that interview, I think too, that you were talking about how similar the habits are. And it was funny that it was happening in a time in my life where I opened a business as well. So I have two basic businesses. One is I'm a traveling trainer where I'm contracted out for people to go with them wherever they go. I'm with them for like year-long contracts. And my current clients I've been with for almost 6 years now. And I have a couple trainers under me that will also do similar jobs. But I was going to try to scale that business. That business is really, really hard because it's very few people in. It's very hard to get proper leads because there's not a lot of people that want to pay someone to travel around the world with them. You have to have an exorbitant
Yeah.
amount of wealth.
Or can afford it. Yeah, it's going to have to be a professional athlete in one of the sports that actually pays: football, basketball, golf. There's a small group. I was
Yeah,
fortunate to have been able to work with some of those folks myself, but the vast majority of what I do, and I tell people who are getting into the business of personal training that we wear it as a badge of honor when we train a famous athlete, and it makes us I get recognized for that fact because I have quite a stable of well-known world-class athletes. Obviously, Hafthor Bjornsson, Mountain from Game of Thrones, is world's strongest man, and Brian Shaw, and we've got Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles, who just won a Super Bowl, has been a client of mine for many years. Mitchell Hooper, the world's strongest man. I worked with Stone Cold Steve Austin, John Jones, UFC heavyweight champion. I spent the better part of 2 years flying back and forth to New Mexico and working at his camp. Henry Cejudo. I mean, the list goes on and on. But the fact of the matter is, those are the easy people to train, and also they're not very lucrative unless they're very wealthy and can afford to pay you. Generally speaking, there's 100 people in line behind you that'll train them for free, and use that as a resume builder for for Gen Pop, which is what the bulk of what we do here. Even at the Vertical Diet, over 90% of my clients are folks that just want to lose weight. The vast majority, men and women, dad bods and soccer moms.
oh, 100%. And the kind of clients that I normally train are high net worth businessmen that just kind of want that accessibility. So they want your time, like they basically want to own your day for the most part, so then they just like
Yeah,
call you up within 15, 20 minutes. I want to train. Hey, what should I do with my diet? Hey, what should I do with this? And they have some aesthetic goals.
yeah,
It's like a really niche. And at the time I was like, I can't figure out how to scale this. And I'm kind of an ambitious guy. I wanted to do something. And I kind of was like, man, I don't know if I want to jump into another business. I was a bit scared. And then I heard that podcast from you, and I was like, okay, everything is that seems like there's a trend here. It's like if I follow the same discipline approach I would if I'm trying to get down for a weight cut or if I'm trying to get ready for a fight, as long as I follow that discipline approach, I have a lot of the same tools I need to become successful, and the resilience to get off when I'm not successful, which was probably going to happen at some point, to keep going. And I thought that was like it really took a switch in my head, and I started my online business, and a lot of that was thanks to hearing that podcast.
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So I wanted to go outside of the business side because I know most people that are listening, that's not what they're here for. But I wanted to ask you something, and it kind of does play into the business a little bit. You are training a lot of the Gen Pop, and as you said, most of the people in Gen Pop are trying to lose weight. And nowadays in the business, there's like kind of like a big question mark that I have with a lot of my sales calls when I'm getting clients. But I was like, well, I could come to you, or I could, go to my doctor and get a GLP-1 agonist of some sort and lose the weight there. My argument to this always is, I think the GLP-1s, my personal opinion, I would love to hear yours. My personal opinion is that it's an amazing drug, and it seems that there's a lot of benefits, and I'm waiting to learn more, but I think that they should be used with diet and exercise together, and I think that it could be dangerous to do it without it. But that is a thing. How do you see it affecting the fitness industry as a whole? How does it affect maybe your business? And generally, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think initially people had some trepidation or resistance to GLP-1 agonists because they thought it was going to replace personal trainers, and they thought it was being recommended to be used in lieu of diet and exercise, and that's never been the case. There are some profiteers out there who will write a prescription to just about anyone, but for the most part, responsible doctors and even clinics that provide this product are recommending diet and exercise. There are a lot of problems when you don't. I agree with you. It's revolutionary, and it is. There has not been a more successful, even close. It's not even close. Successful diet medication. For a while there, we were prescribing phentermine and things like that, which has a whole host of problems and with not nearly the benefits. But we see in 2-year trials using semaglutide as compared to the average population dieting for long-term weight loss maintenance, which is what is important to talk about. All diets result in weight loss in the short term, but long-term dietary adherence is really where diets fail long-term. It takes a lot of time and energy and commitment and coaching to be able to get somebody to adhere to a diet long term. And we have very small, as you know, the recidivism is extremely high. Over 50% within the first year regain the weight, and by year 3, it's 80 to 95% regain the weight that they originally lost. But it's revolutionary because it addresses the cause. One of the causes, and we can get deeper into things like genetics and socioeconomic problems and the food environment and food insecurity and education and all of that. But as far as the individual is concerned, it's hunger. It's food noise. It's some people aren't. The genetic component is that some people don't get satisfied or satiated as quickly and don't stay satiated as long. That's the genetic component. And it's about changing behavior. I've said in a rant, you may have heard my obesity rant, I said, in the war on obesity, the enemy is also the victim. We're at war with ourselves. It's about changing behavior, and that seems to be what these drugs do, is they help you change behavior. You're just not hungry. Now, that can cause some problems, as you know. If you don't eat enough protein or enough calories, then you're going to lose a lot of muscle tissue. And so it's important. So now, as personal trainers, I have just the opposite take on the semaglutide. I think personal trainers are of more value, or of greater need, to help navigate these folks through this course of medication. Doctors just don't have the time. They have their 7 to 15 minutes with a client. They can prescribe the medication, but now the customer and they give pamphlets and what have you and some general advice. But we know that wanes. You need constant attention, whether it be support groups or a coach or texting. We see lots of the studies that show that the more interaction that you have, I've always said that the trainers on the front lines are the most valuable people. It's not the PhDs in nutrition, it's not the MDs, it's not the exercise scientists. It's the personal trainer that touches the client 1 or 2 times a week. That is the most important person in terms of their ability to maintain weight loss long term. And I really, there are side effects associated with the medications, and it's important to recognize that for those people who are suffering from obesity, they have an increased exposure to a whole host of different disease states. Cardiovascular disease, cancer risk goes up by as much as 200% in people who have obesity. A whole host of other problems, diabetes, etc., whereby you now have to make a cost-benefit analysis. If I take this semaglutide, there are some side effects associated with it, but does the cost of that, is the benefit of the semaglutide greater than the cost of the side effects? And it's very individualistic, the greatest of which, of course, we know is the nausea. And there are ways to mitigate that with microdosing and smaller meals. It slows digestion. So if you eat a huge meal and the food sits there for a long time, you're going to experience a great deal of nausea. Same thing could be said of people who get bariatric surgery, though, as well. When you overeat, you're going to usually throw up and get nauseous. So there are ways to mitigate those some of those side effects. I think the biggest concern is muscle loss, but even the studies there are kind of equivocal. A similar amount of weight loss in the absence of semaglutide will yield muscle loss as well, and that's to be expected. And so, again, ideally, getting sufficient protein, which can be hard to do when you're not hungry, and then lifting weights becomes mandatory in order to get a good outcome. And I guess the last thing that people, and there's other things, but we don't need to get too deep into it, but probably the last big thing that people complain about is that when you stop using the medication, you regain the weight. That's true of any diet that you go on and off. That's true of any medication, or most medications. If you've got, say, if you're on blood pressure medication, you go off, your blood pressure is going to go back up. If you're on thyroid medication, you go off, you're going to have thyroid dysfunction. Same thing could be true with people who are hypogonadal on testosterone therapy. You go off, you're going to be hypogonadal again. You could say the same thing of birth control, for that matter. There's an endless number of medications that you go on that you may not be able to come off because it's treating a condition that you have. And I would hope that eventually people could come off of these medications, but as we know from even in the absence of medication, recidivism is extremely high, and there can be some weight gain, which is, again, why it's important for trainers to be in there, coaching them on what they can do to maintain the weight loss and good habits, and then constant attention. I think that's the biggest thing. The education component, people know. It's not like people are confused that eating at McDonald's and drinking sugar-laden beverages is causing weight gain.
Yeah.
That's not the point. The point is that there's a whole lot of things influencing that, from obviously marketing and, as we mentioned earlier, socioeconomic and what have you. But having someone there, that's kind of the challenge, is having someone there to be able to hold you accountable. Some people do it with apps, some people do it with one-on-one training, but however it is, it's necessary. So again, that I think makes the fitness industry, the personal trainers, even more valuable and more successful, especially for those people who need it the most. And we're not talking about a bikini bod where you want to lose 10 pounds for summer. We're talking about people who have serious health risks associated with their weight, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer.
And actually, I have like two things. I didn't want to stop you on the thing. I have two things I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
One is, I think another thing that's recently come out, they're showing that it seems that fat cells have they increase hunger drive. So if you have more fat cells, they've shrunken down. That would make you more hungry. So people that were heavier in the past may be getting a higher hunger drive than someone that was skinnier for their most of their life, or had less fat. And from a personal experience, I used to think something was wrong with me because I would be, the whole fight camp would start. Everyone would start their diet to get ready for the show. If there was like our tournament, let's say a jiu-jitsu tournament, everyone's getting ready. Everyone starts their diet. Everyone's having no problem the first week of their diet. And by week one, I'm already dreaming of donuts every night. Like, I'm getting like all these feelings of diet fatigue. I'm like asking them, like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like trying to see what they do different. They're eating just the same things I am, basically, even though we're a little bit different. I'm like, okay, I'm following the same measurements. I'm, have my nutrition guide, which wasn't great back then, to be fair, but, I'm doing everything they're doing, basically. We're on the same level of education at that point, and they're just like, it's no big deal. The last week, they feel what I felt the entire time. By the time it
Yeah,
comes from me, fight would come, whether I won, lost, or done, my face would be shoved into the biggest Ben and Jerry's bottle I could get to. And I just
yeah,
couldn't understand how they did it. I was like, I must be a problem. It must be me. And like when I heard
yeah.
that new study recently, I was like, well, this makes perfect sense.
And that's the genetic component we discussed. Different people have different hunger signaling cues. There's other things that we could talk about specific to what you're discussing. And I lived through it too. Remember, I've been competing in bodybuilding since 1988. There's many times throughout my career where I had to diet down into single-digit body fat to get on stage at 5, 6% body fat. And I remember the grind. I remember going to bed and all you could think about is food. I remember dreaming about a pizza going through a pizza oven and the pepperoni curling up around the edges and the cheese
Oh man.
boiling, and it was overwhelming, the food noise, and you know I described that. There was a video I watched recently of a really good influencer whose name escapes me right now, but he was talking about the fact that he had dieted down for bodybuilding shows, had the same experience, and then he was talking to a relative of his who had suffered from obesity all their life, and he was describing how hungry he was going through this period. And she said in return, she said, "You've just described every day of my life." And can you
Yeah.
imagine living with that same? You've experienced it.
Yeah.
Now, when people start complaining and calling it cheating, when somebody tries to use a semaglutide or GLP-1 agonist for weight loss, not to understand that, not to have been through that. I never understood my mom's battles with depression and anxiety until I had an experience that I talked about in my video, Stress for Success, where I woke up one night with my heart pounding and staring at the ceiling and that overwhelming cold and heat that goes through your body because, I had a panic attack about a business venture I was involved in that was having some difficult times. And my mom's dealt with that her whole life, and it was the first time I ever had empathy for that situation. I always, was kind of angry with her and blamed her for being that way. So not too much of an aside, but here's some things that are important to remember. One, obviously, is the hunger signaling. You mentioned fat and fat cells. It seems that, and we don't have enough conclusive evidence as to whether or not that's the driver of hunger, but we do have some good evidence to show that muscle loss, which is very common, would be a significant driver of hunger. And what happens is when you lose a lot of muscle in a diet, and then you start to gain weight back, you gain more fat than muscle, and your hunger signaling cues are elevated for an extended period of time because your muscle hasn't come back. Even though all of your weight came back, your muscle didn't come back, which is why, again, it becomes extremely important to do the training. We do have some tools for athletes, and I work with a lot of athletes, fighters included, people who have to make weight classes. Um, and they're modestly effective. They certainly aren't GLP-1 agonists, and there's no food you can eat that's going to do the same thing as a GLP-1 agonist, not anywhere close. The way that the pharmaceutical companies have manipulated the half-life of these drugs, you get relief from hunger for a couple weeks at a time as opposed to an hour or two. And so anybody who's claiming that certain foods raise GLP-1 is they're dishonest at best about what it is they're trying to do, and I get it. Sleep, obviously, if you lose sleep, and that can be hard in training because you're overtrained and it tends to be harder to sleep. That's a big one for appetite control and insulin sensitivity. Also, just being awake more hours in a day gives you more opportunity to eat. Higher protein diets, obviously, higher fiber diets, higher satiety foods. When I design diets for people who are trying to gain weight, I use low satiety foods, my monster mashes and ground beef and rice and bone broth. But when I'm designing a diet for weight loss, I'm using steak, so they have to actually cut and chew the food. It takes them longer, just the mechanical process. I don't use white rice. I use boiled potatoes, which on the satiety index are very satiating for a longer period of time. For my weight gainers, I'll use a yogurt OJ shake. For dieters, I'll use oranges and berries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries. They're low calorie, high density foods, mostly water and fiber. Uh, so high satiety foods really can help with that. Textures are important. Soft, mushy foods are easier to eat more of. And then, what we call high volume foods, foods that like salads, where you can eat a ton of food but get very few calories out of them. So we throw a lot of salads in there. And then steps, just a step count. Getting 6,000+ steps a day has an appetite suppressing benefit. Here's the downside of that. And I've talked about this many times on podcasts since people always misinterpret my claims. The downside of exercise is that more exercise doesn't seem to result in more weight loss, or at least not the same return on your investment. If you do twice the exercise, you're not going to get twice the weight loss. So what's going to happen is what's called compensation occurs. You're going to end up getting tired, and you'll down-regulate your non-exercise activity, the amount of time that you spend just up walking around during the day. And you'll sit more, and you'll be hungrier, and you'll eat more. And so sometimes people eat back a lot of their calories because they're training real hard. And you guys don't have a choice. You have to train very, very hard, and that's going to make you hungrier. So it's a difficult process. I do try and lose. I get fighters that will try and lose too much weight too fast, and that can be a huge problem. So I do try and get them to start their diet further out from weigh-ins. And I also like to get them to reach water cut weight, not fight weight, but the weight that they need to be at a week out or 10 days out when they start their water cut. I try and get them there 30 days out, which is, I know that seems like a high ask. The reason for that is that you tend to lose some strength when you're dieting. And if you don't have to diet and lose weight the last 30 days, you can regain some of that strength. And that can be beneficial, of course, for fight day. I don't want to have a weak athlete. And same thing with the water cut. I have to be very cautious. What are we cutting during that last week? I'm not trying to lose fat. I just want to shed the water and put it back on so that they can actually perform on fight day.
It's funny that you say that, is because so I basically, my career I fought in the UFC. When I got into the UFC, right before I got in, which is a classic fighter story, I was injured. I was kind of like, oh, I've been on this win streak. They're never going to call me, and I kind of gave up. I'm like, I'm just going to go teach MMA in China. I'm gonna leave. I had a job offer, so I was eating, and I'd gotten like massively fat, and then I didn't know I got a call, an email actually said, "Hey, you want to fight in 3 weeks against Mairbek Taisumov?" First of all, the guy's name's Mairbek Taisumov. You know already that's a problem. Immediately,
Yeah,
it's one weight class up, and I'm still 30 pounds above my weight class.
yeah,
There. And at that point, I had an eating disorder with yo-yo dieting from just the years of up and
yeah,
down. Was not lifting weights consistently. I would do this, and a lot of fighters do this. I would lift a lot of weights during camp when I was like depleted, super low calories, exhausted. And when I was out of camp, I wouldn't lift weights. And it's just so
yeah.
mind boggling. Like it's the complete opposite of what I should have been doing.
It's so
And I got in
frustrating,
the
brother.
fight, I lost, and I got injured. And then I retired, and I decided to come back at some point as for one fight. And it's funny, at that point I had studied to become a personal trainer. I had got my like nutrition certificates, just the basic, most of the online stuff. I really dug in deep. I was training people full time at that point, and I had my own gym. And I got back in, and I'd been lifting weights, and the weight cut was so much easier. Everything was
Yeah.
so much easier. I was like, how didn't I do this for 10 years? I got to tell these fighters, and that's kind of what got me into trying to push this stuff out here a little more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a year-round. Competing and fighting is a year-round. There is no quote-unquote off-season. Uh, with training, we want to employ what we call the concurrent method. We want to gain or maintain all of the different speed, strength, uh, size, agility. So we don't ever want to completely detrain them. So we train them year round, but we might focus on one or the other during different, periodize them during different blocks throughout the year. And so if you're in the quote unquote off season from fighting, if you're not fighting for a while, that could be a good time to reduce the volume of your fight training and increase the volume of strength training in particular, because fighters generally don't want to put on weight, and so hypertrophy is something uh, that we try and avoid, unless I've got a heavyweight fighter like John Jones wanted to put on a significant amount of weight. And so you can maintain those adaptations with a very small amount of volume, which is important in fight camp. Like you said, you did all of your hard training during fight camp, which is not when you want to do it, because your body has limited physical capital to invest, and you want to be able to fight. Do all of your fight-specific training, your wrestling and your jiu-jitsu and your boxing, and you want to do all of that, your Muay Thai, with more frequency and effort, and so you don't have a lot of energy left to invest in the weight room and to accumulate more fatigue that's going to actually adversely affect your time training on the mat. And so you just want to do a maintenance program at that. All the strength that you gained in the off season, 6 months out, 5 months out, 4 months out, you were working on strength, so you were training 2, maybe 3 times a week on a particular lift to gain strength. And then you just cut back to one set once a week. You can maintain your peak strength and commit the rest of that energy into your fight training. So a good personal trainer, as you know from having learned all of that, can design a program like that for a fighter. But most fighters reach out to you 2 months before the fight.
Yeah,
And we know
exactly.
they should reach out to you 6 months to a year before the fight. It's always, you mentioned, the name of your fighter, and it always makes me think of Mikhail Koklev, who was um, he was a strongman, a pro strongman. He was a Olympic lifter, and he was a power lifter. One of the strongest guys on the planet. He's in our industry. He's a legend. But I had the chance to train with him and attend his seminar. And the Russians have always had long-term plans. They don't look at things in 3-month windows, horizons. They look at things in 5 years, and they're very disciplined about that. And even Mikhail, when he appeared at the Arnold Classic, which is actually coming up this weekend, I've got 2 athletes in Arnold or at the Arnold Classic, Mitchell Hooper and Hafthor Bjornsson, both competing in the strongman over there. So
Oh, that's gonna be awesome.
shout out to those guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
But when Mikhail was making a guest appearance at the Animal Cage, every year at the Arnold Classic, they have the Animal Cage where some of the strongest powerlifters and strongmen in the world come and do these exhibition lifts for the audience. And it's a chain link fence, and they're on the inside, and the audience is on the outside cheering them on. And some really big lifts happen in there. It's exciting. I've had the opportunity to be invited a couple times myself and do some big lifts with some great powerlifters. But you get all amped up. Mikhail, he's capable of doubling or tripling nearly a 900-pound deadlift. I think he did 765. That was
Ooh,
that was his pull on his schedule for his next meet. He didn't go in there and try and pull 900 because
yeah.
he's so and any American lifter would have gone in there and tried to pull 900 at the
Yeah. Yeah.
Animal Cage, right? It's Arnold,
Yeah.
you're on video, and that's always stuck in my head, just how disciplined he was and how that wasn't the time and the place. He said he would do 2 90+% deadlifts a year, and he would do 2 max efforts a year. The two
That's
90
it.
plus percent, that's it. The 290+% were at qualifiers for nationals and worlds, and the max efforts were at nationals and worlds. Everything else he was training as powerlifters should train at about 85 of the percent of your 1 rep max, leaving 2 reps in the tank, meaning typically an 85% of your 1 rep max load, you could grind out 5 reps. The first 3 are reasonably, the tempo is reasonably, I won't say fast because it's still a heavy weight, but the last 2 are grinders, and we all know what grinders are if we've lifted weights. A good power lifter won't grind their weights. You don't want to train to be slower. You want to train to move heavy weight fast, and you can get all the stimulation you need from those first 3 reps. That's much the same way I train fighters. I don't like to see fighters grind reps, deadlifts, squats, and even weight loaded chin-ups and stuff, I like to keep them at least 2, sometimes maybe 3 reps away from failure. And and another thing I have to do with them is get them to slow down in the gym and realize that the stimulus for strength and hypertrophy in the gym requires longer rest periods. And fighters try to turn everything into a conditioning
Yeah.
exercise. They want to do set to set to set with 30-second rest periods. And can I superset this, or they want to move around
Can
the
I
gym
shadow
like they're
box in between?
yes. Can I shadow box in between? I'm like, no, sit down. A very important recovery adaptation for strength training is central nervous system recuperation, and that can take 2 or 3 minutes after a hard set, and where you just sit and relax. And there's some other substrates that like creatine phosphate and hydrogen ion clearance and things that allow you to dissipate some of that pump, so that your next set isn't inhibited. The load and the number of reps you can accomplish isn't inhibited by the pace at which you're going or some other adaptation that you're not training. So we separate strength training and hypertrophy training from cardiovascular fitness and other adaptations to make sure that we're optimizing that specific purpose of that workout.
And when you do you ever have athletes? Because I know you train a lot of people, and a lot at this point. You're like, obviously you're a legend in the industry, so you're getting a lot of high level guys. But I've trained a lot of fighters that have come in, and I do add some hypertrophy work to their training program. One of the reasons is, especially a lot of the guys that come from a jiu-jitsu background, and I say this in the most loving way, and I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, but they come in a bit soft. Like they'll come in kind of under muscled, and I was soft as well. Okay, I'm gonna go there. I don't want no jiu-jitsu guys to hate on me. I'm sorry, but I mean, and so sometimes I'm like, I need you to build like a certain layer of muscle. I think that you'll be at a healthier weight, at a stronger weight, at the same weight class. Like, and my goal isn't to like drive their body weight, obviously massing as high as I
Right.
can.
You
It's
don't want to
just
take
to
them out of their
build
weight
some.
class.
Exactly. But I just want
Agreed.
them to be a more developed version in the weight class. Do you ever use hypertrophy like that for any athletes that you've trained, or that just hasn't played
Oh,
out?
most certainly. And a bigger muscle can become a stronger muscle. Having said that, you don't need to add muscle to get stronger. Strength is a central nervous system adaptation. And so, as just previously described, those aren't optimal hypertrophy training programs. Leaving 2, 3 reps in the tank and only doing 1 or 2 sets is not ideal for hypertrophy. Hypertrophy, you'd like to get, maybe sets of 5 or 6 with 1 rep in reserve, meaning closer to failure. With a little more frequency, and you might be able to even throw in a little extra volume on that. You might do 3 to 5 sets per workout twice a week. But yeah, I think it's important that but also another important thing about putting a little bit of muscle on them is they're going to lose some muscle in camp.
Hmm.
And so you'd like to anticipate some of that because they're going to be in a calorie deficit and they're going to be training very hard. And hopefully you can stave off some of the muscle loss with the strength program I mentioned, just going in twice a week and hitting 1 set per body part should be sufficient to maintain, even once a week, would be sufficient to maintain strength. You probably need twice a week to maintain hypertrophy under those circumstances, calorie deficit, high workload MMA training. But and then adequate protein. Obviously, you're going to get a gram of protein per pound of body weight throughout that time period. But that everybody's, I think, in tune with that. But I agree. There are certain folks who are just weak. And
Yeah.
I don't want to call out any names, but we know some jiu-jitsu fighters who have incredible endurance, who just get pushed around by more powerful fighters. We saw that for a while there with some of the wrestlers were pushing around the better boxers and jiu-jitsu fighters. And the powerful wrestlers, the Matt Hughes of the world and others,
Yeah.
were just overwhelming fighters who just weren't strong enough. And so it's important. And I know jiu-jitsu exclusively, if you're just fighting jiu-jitsu, even jiu-jitsu, I mean, uh, some of the better jiu-jitsu guys now are getting stronger. I mean, Gordon Ryan's obviously an
Gordon
example.
Ryan is, yeah,
Uh,
massive.
Incredibly powerful and trains hard with weights. He came into John's camp. I had the opportunity to live with him for a while at John's at the house where all of the athletes and coaches stayed that were in town training with John. And yeah, Gordon's incredibly disciplined, and just a hell of an athlete. So I had the opportunity to cook for them for the week and try and put some weight on them. So it was a fun time. But just as a fly on the wall, you see these people are they've. It's not just the discipline of the sport; it's everything outside of the sport that they're doing very well. Also, their sleep, their recovery, their food, everything is really on point.
I bet John Jones loved having you around. I mean, Gordon Ryan had loved having you around because he has a lot of digestive issues from what I've
Yep.
heard. And putting on, like, he tried to put on a whole bunch of mass and then he lost some of the weight. And he said it just was, he said training would just be nauseous constantly. Uh,
Yeah.
and I know the vertical diet, like, you discussed this quite a bit. And it's something that I started using with a lot of my leaner women clients because a lot of my leaner women clients, they almost become chronic dieters. Like they're very like on that
Yeah.
borderline level. Like
Yeah.
they just like being lean. They kind of like having that lean
Yeah.
look. And it's like, yeah, you've been eating super big salads every day, which is great, but you're having like IBS symptoms and you're like, oh, I'm stressed. Yes, I'm sure. I'm not saying I don't know what the cause is for sure, but we
Yeah.
might want to eat some more easily digestible foods. And a lot of times I'll like recommend the vertical diet to them. I'll be like, Stan has dealt with this millions of times. Like, I think you should
Yeah.
read this, and maybe you can touch on that a little bit.
Oh yeah, and again, I go back to starting competing in 1988, and I was coaching people in the early 90s, women included, a lot of women, including pros. I worked with Nadia Wyatt, who was third place Miss Olympia, second place Arnold Classic. I've worked with a lot of women over the years, and uh, I it's specifically addressed in the vertical diet. I talked about it in my Iceland seminar over 7 8 years ago. It's got almost 7 million views now. Um, exactly what you said. Women, they tend to be chronic dieters. They'll diet more often, like year round. And this sets them up for what's called the female triad, um, where they end up having amenorrhea, which is cessation of the menstrual period. They end up having bone mineral density loss. I see. I worked with runners at the University of Oregon, Tracktown, USA, Nike Town. Way back in the 90s, I worked with distance runners, and the women in particular would end up with shin splints quite frequently. And it happened more recently. There was a big legal dispute. It was broadly advertised that one of the coaches at the Nike camp, one of the athletes, suffered from very significant health problems as a result of the chronic dieting and losing too much weight. Um, and so, you have to do something to try and intervene in that. And usually it's just has to do with a very uncomfortable conversation about their current condition. They end up with hypothyroidism and sometimes depression as a result. And so I talked about the guru diets, which were quite popular back in the 90s. And most of the big bikini camps, the ones who were popular for training the most bikini people, they had the guru diet. They had the tilapia, egg whites, protein powder, loads of broccoli, a scoop of almond butter diet, and that was extremely restrictive. So I know that I introduced the FODMAP menu to these clients as a part of the foundation of the vertical diet, and people consider that to be somewhat restrictive. But in comparison to what's going on in the industry, it was intended to be much more inclusive. And so women at all ages tend to demonize based on social media in particular. I was working with high school softball team a couple of years ago in Arizona, and a couple of the girls, the parents told me that they were having problems. Their performance was declining. They were having fatigue, and we did the 40 laser test, and they were significantly slower than what they were previously. We always like to measure their performance. And so I said, get a blood test, and sure enough, they had anemia, which is low iron, which will have a huge impact on fatigue and energy. And it's because they got into one of these diet programs where they started eliminating certain foods, and those foods are generally going to be red meat, which is where a lot of your iron is, and B vitamins and zinc and creatine and a whole host of other beneficial micronutrients. And they'll demonize the egg yolk for some reason. They'll eat the egg white, but the egg yolk is where your biotin. That's for skin, hair, and nails. That's why a lot of the women dieting for shows end up with that brittle hair, and they start losing their hair. And hypothyroidism contributes to that as well. Choline, of course, very important in the egg yolk. They'll demonize dairy, which is a huge mistake. The research is overwhelming on population basis that for those people who can tolerate dairy, there are some dairy allergies, and there are some intolerances where people have to be cautious what type of dairy and how much before they start seeing some sort of lactose intolerance. But for those who can consume dairy or consuming the types of dairy such as Greek yogurt that don't, or even a cheddar cheese that don't contribute to lactose intolerance to the same degree as say milk would, we see an improvement, an independent effect. And I say this, I'm quoting Dr. Stu Phillips, PhD, exercise phys, McMaster University out of Canada. He has a lot of great work on the fact that dairy has an independent effect, independent of calories, independent of protein, independent of calcium, has an independent effect on improving BMI and performance, body mass index. So it helps you stay leaner and helps your performance. And so I include a significant amount of dairy in all the diets, men and women both, weight loss, weight gain, usually Greek yogurt with fruit in most cases. And they'll start demonizing things like salt, which, for an active individual who's sweating a lot and eating clean, if I hate to use that word, but, not a lot of processed foods, packaged foods, or fast foods, they will not add any additional sodium. And that could be a problem as well with lack of iodine, and iodine is necessary for thyroid function. So I see these restrictive diets, these guru diets in the fitness figure bikini industry, which was one of the reasons I introduced that portion of the vertical diet for dieting, and in particular for women, was to try and address some of those problems, and that's why we've had such great success. Nadia Wyatt, for instance, who again took third in the Miss Olympia, second in the Arnold Classic, she was eating red meat all the way up to the day of the show, and had a whole egg in her diet plan, and had some yogurt in her diet plan. Calories are king, and as long as we maintained a slight deficit, some of that, was due to caloric restriction. Some of that was due to increased energy expenditure, but we brought her stage ready. We also dramatically reduced the amount of steady state cardio she had to do by increasing the amount of lifting that she did. She enjoyed lifting better, and it had the better, I think, the better specific stimulus to what she was trying to do, which was to maintain lean mass, dieting into a show.
And I was about to say something because I've realized this even for myself. So quite recently, I did a diet to one of my clients bet me a whole bunch of money that I couldn't get down to single digit body fat anymore. And he's like, yeah, you can't do it in 12 weeks. I had, to be fair to him, I gained a bit of weight. It wasn't too bad, but yeah, I was just focusing on lifting heavy. I was enjoying life. And then he was focused on the business. He was like, man, you can't do it no more. You gotten lazy. I'm like, all right, we made a bet. And I went on a very heavy deficit because I did have to lose quite a bit of weight. I was probably 187 pounds, 188 pounds at the time. And I knew for me to get really lean, I thought I was going to have to get down to about 163, 164 pounds. I actually was super pleasantly surprised that by the time I was down to about 170, 168, I was quite cut. Now, was I single digit? Who knows? Depending on what measurements you're using. But I look, if that's what he meant by single digit, is I look like I was single digit. But when I did that diet, I was probably eating close to 1,600 calories a day. I was trying to get 1.2 grams per pound of body weight of protein per day because I was super worried about losing muscle loss. And I found it very, very difficult to get my micronutrients in because I was so careful on what I was eating. So basically I ended up doing, like you're saying, one of these versions of a guru diet approach. Plus I live on the road, so I only live at a hotel. So I'm constantly trying to find the right foods. I have the calories I'm buying from supermarkets. And I realized how much my performance was dropping. Even though I was hitting my macronutrients that, up to the level it was, I was taking supplements, I was doing everything in my power I could do, but I felt so horrible close to the end of the diet. And almost mentally, I started getting into a bit of a depressed mindset, which was a little strange for me. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, what's happening? And I remember I was close. I was doing well, so I started reintroducing red meat into my diet, and I had like one egg, and I would just kind of like cut my calories somewhere else, or had more vegetables so I can like fill it up. And I was like, oh man, I started feeling better by the end of that. And I kind of came out of it towards the end, where I was like, okay, I'm feeling normal again. But yeah, it's so important to hit those micronutrients. I think people, especially when their goal is just get shredded or get lean or lose weight, they lose track of that so quickly.
That's a perfect explanation. That's one of the reasons when I have clients on diets that are pretty calorically restricted that I kind of stay away from, say, a protein shake. I'd much prefer they would eat that food, both for the satiety benefit, but also for the micronutrient diversity and density. Eat that food in animal protein, and I say animal protein in particular in this case because a lot of the vegetable proteins, in order to get enough protein, you usually have to get significantly more calories. And that's not to say that, I have a whole chapter in my book on vegetarian and vegan dieting, and I've worked with vegan clients. But when the calories get super, super restricted, you have to get a maximum return out of every calorie. And oftentimes, when you get down that low, you might even need a multivitamin. I've talked about obviously the D3 and magnesium deficiencies that are common in athletes and dieters, and sometimes you can utilize a multivitamin in cases like that.
Yeah, and this is like something interesting. I'm curious on your take on this. So I recently had on my podcast Dr. Dean St. Martin. He's a pharmacologist. He owns a supplement company called Supplement Needs, and he was explaining to me how a lot of the supplements are advertised out there, they actually underdose the amount of the supplement that you need, or what it's advertising is like the main goal. So you're buying a supplement and you think that you need 700 uh, micrograms or whatever to get the effective dose, but you're getting 200 in that pill, and it's just kind of false marketing. And he was talking about how that's why it's really important to choose your supplements. And have you ever had any issues like this? Have you thought about this as something that you think about with your clients when you are trying to give them supplements and things like that, especially
It would
vitamins?
just be so hard for you to tell personally. I mean, you can use chronometer or chronometer to see how much your diet is supplying. It goes in. The chronometer provides you the micronutrients when you plug all your foods in. It's kind of like a MyFitnessPal sort of diet tracker, but it does micronutrients. And then if you are going to supplement because you're low, I think the answer to that, all of that, is that you should use a third party tested company. You're going to pay a few extra dollars for your product, but they usually have documentation showing that it's been third party tested and the doses of each ingredient.
Yeah, that's great. And his company does do that, and that was something that
Yeah.
he like really pushed forward. I mean, he was like, yeah, whatever you use, whether it's my company or any other company, he really highly recommends you use a third party and use that, pay the extra couple dollars, And it's obviously we're talking people that are very like focused on getting to their goals, trying to lose a lot of weight, trying to gain a lot of weight, whatever they're trying to do exactly. I wanted to go one other area here before we get off. Like you do train professional athletes and fighters especially, and I want to hear your opinion on this. What do you think about in the future? I don't know if this is happening. I know that's happening in the bodybuilding world quite a bit because I've been interviewing a few bodybuilders, and they're using GLP-1s to make their dieting much easier and going down. Do you see this happening like also in like combat sports? And where do you see the downsides if people are thinking about doing this? And maybe what are the upsides?
Boy, I tell you, this is a quagmire. I'm popular for having said that if you want to be healthy, don't compete. Uh,
Yeah.
Health and fitness are not the same thing. Health is free from illness or injury. Show me someone who's never been injured. I'll show you someone who's never won anything. Fitness is the ability to perform a particular duty or task, and the fitness level required to be a UFC champion, not healthy. Fitness level required to be a strongman, pro strongman, not healthy. A 14-year-old gymnast at the Olympics with Achilles tendon tears, or a 10-year-old badminton player in China with blown out lateral collateral ligaments. Sport is a very challenge, as you know, having been injured many times in your sport. Uh, Fitness and health are not the same thing. And I'm coming from an industry that's widely known for performance-enhancing drug usage as an advantage, and it's pervasive in a lot of sports, and that can include things like steroids, but it can also include things like anti-inflammatories, growth hormone, even I think Tiger Woods had an eye surgery
Yeah.
to improve his vision. So people are going to utilize and there are risks associated with all of those things, and people are going to utilize any advantage that they can. A lot of what you do in fighting and weight loss, and even in bodybuilding and powerlifting, is psychological. I don't think people understand the fatigue is accumulated. Your central nervous system is impacted by your ability to stay focused on the task at hand, and your ability to contract muscles is a psychological process, and that's usually what breaks first, and it breaks based on accumulation of fatigue. So if they can minimize distractions, hunger would certainly be one. There's certain things you can do to kind of hype yourself up for a workout so that you optimize that particular workout stimulus, which is important because that's the driver. You mentioned increasing your protein to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. Protein's great, it's important, but the stimulus is far more important. You can eat all the protein you want. You're not going to gain muscle or retain muscle if you don't have sufficient stimulus. The stimulus is probably, I want to say it's 80-90%. We've done, not me, but there are many trials out there where they've done severe calorie restriction. They compare a 500 calorie restriction to a 1,000 calorie restriction, and they get equivalent lean mass retention if the training stimulant is sufficient enough. Challenges at the end of that diet program is those who had the larger deficit were very fatigued, and they were tired. It was hard for them to maintain that training stimulus, but they didn't lose muscle, even though they had a huge calorie deficit, and it's because they had sufficient training. And I would recommend the same thing for athletes, as we discussed earlier, but you would try and minimize fatigue by doing fewer sets less often, because you would already in the off season accomplished that adaptation. You're just trying to maintain it. So hunger is a huge thing, and I do think it will happen. I obviously can't, judge someone for making those decisions. Earlier I said that it's not for bikini bodies, but if you're getting ready for a fight, and that fight has a purse, and you're going to get, that's how you make your living, then usually people will make those decisions based on their cost-benefit analysis, which isn't always regarding health. The cost-benefit is, am I going to get paid? Am I going to win? And I think we had some studies years back. I talked about in a rant one time that if you ask an Olympic athlete if they could take a pill that would give them a gold medal, but they would die 5 years later, would they take it? And a lot of them said they would. That's how driven they are for their goals. These are type A people. They're all of them that I've worked with are very driven, determined type A people who will make just about any sacrifice to accomplish their goal, and that comes at a cost, both personally in terms of psychologically and family and all those other things. One of the reasons I stopped competing, not just because of my age, I was 45 at the time I set my world records, but throughout that time, 40 to 45. But I had a daughter when I was 45, and that kind of woke me up as to what's the longevity of a power lifter. And a lot of guys have to do the same, fighters included. How many knocks can you take on the noggin before you start having brain injuries, etc. So it will happen. I can see the argument for it, as I just discussed, the fact that if you can avoid that hunger that you were experiencing in camp, it might help you to focus and be. I think one of the downsides would be, would you still get enough protein? Because seriously, I have a lot of clients on these medications, and the hardest challenge is getting them to eat enough. And they'll eat once a day and not even think about it. Doesn't even occur to them. I go, have you eaten yet today? It'd be 6 o'clock at night. They're like, oh, no, I haven't eaten yet today. Very common that they just aren't hungry. It doesn't occur to them. Or if they do eat a meal, they only eat half or a third or a quarter of it. And so that's very common. And if you don't especially as a fighter, you want to have a small deficit, and you want to get certainly sufficient, as you mentioned earlier, sufficient variety of high impact foods, macronutrients and micronutrients, so you can feel your workload and not have nutrient deficiencies. So that can be the challenge on that end of it. But there's a lot of there's medical professionals out there suggesting, and there is some research to suggest that it might help with addictive behaviors. Some people see that it's easier to smoke less, or quit smoking, or to drink less, or quit drinking. It seems to have some psychological effect on binging behaviors other than food. So, and I'm not trying to sell them. I'm just saying that it's compelling enough that there is evidence that people are going to use them for things other than just weight loss. And they're going to have to make those decisions themselves with their medical professional and using a cost-benefit analysis based on what their goals are.
Yeah, I think that's super well put. I actually have some TBI from fighting. I have lesions in my brain. Unfortunately, they will probably affect me when I get older. The doctors say more. Right now, thankfully, I don't have too many noticeable um, issues. But they said they might come out later on. So that's one of the things I always tell people. Like, if you're choosing to be in a sport like MMA, or any sport, like you said, to your point, like gymnastics, but especially a sport like MMA, you're already putting yourself in the line of fire. So there is going to be that is something to at least consider as well. Like, these people are willing to give these things up. So health and athletics are different, and thankfully it seems so far GLP-1s, GIPs, they seem quite safe and beneficial. Which it's why I rant on about them so much, because I'm super interested about it. And I've started getting
Yeah.
training clients, and I've been finding some ways to get clients to get their protein in. Like, I make them do mini protein shakes, like basically like protein shake shots, and they take little
Yeah.
shots throughout the day, and that seems to like be working quite well. Because they don't.
It's hard,
If I try to get
especially
them, huh?
especially with women. It can be difficult with women. They'll get up in the morning and have a half a bagel with cream cheese and a coffee, and you realize there's about 4 grams of protein in that. Even if they throw an egg or two in there, that's only 12 grams of protein. They need about 30. And so that's a gap that you need to bridge. And sometimes it can take a little bit of work. You have to eat multiple protein sources, whether it's some yogurt or some chicken or a protein powder, like you mentioned, have a berry shake in the morning. Whatever it takes, try and get them to 30 grams, I think would be a pretty consistent minimum that they need to get at least 3 times a day. Most women are going to need north of 90, 100 grams of protein, depending on their body weight.
I'm actually. I want. I'm gonna. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you know. I've been holding you ranting on here, but I would like to get your opinion on this. What is your opinion on protein timing? So we see that we saw this this study recently that got a lot of buzz all over Instagram and YouTube about 100 grams of protein after working out, still elevating muscle protein synthesis. Are you a believer that still, like, we should be parsing out our protein within like 40-gram increments, or it's still okay? I think everyone agrees that getting the amount of protein is the main goal, but how important is it to parse it out, in your opinion, in your experience?
I guess it depends on what your goals are and what level of competitor you are. For the average population, yes, the vast majority, the top priority is are you getting enough total grams of protein a day? The likelihood you can consume 100 grams of protein in one meal is immediately creates some concerns for whether or not compliance will be achieved. Nobody. The study consumed 100 grams of protein, but they used a casein shake, which is my understanding. And so some of it, yes, your body can utilize 100 grams of protein, but not immediately. What happens is that it takes a long time to break down. And so it's almost as though you ate another meal 4 hours later because the food's still in your stomach. It's not as though you digested 100 grams of protein and that 100 grams gave you a muscle protein synthesis stimulus for 24 hours, um, there's a certain amount of that protein that hasn't been digested yet. And as it's digested, as it continues to be digested over the course of many hours, it extends the muscle protein synthesis benefit of the protein intake. So, and I'm not, crapping on the study. It says what it says, and the conclusion is that for the vast majority of people, getting sufficient protein, the daily total is more important than the frequency. Having said that, if you need 150 grams of protein a day, the likelihood you're going to be able to consume that in one meal is pretty small. 2 meals would probably be better. We do have some recommendations by the International Society of Sports Nutrition that suggests that to optimize performance, you like to have this anabolic window, which we used to think you had to eat protein immediately following a workout in order to optimize the benefits, to get the gains. But apparently that window is more like a garage door, and it's somewhere in about a 6-hour time period. If you eat 2 or 3 hours before training and 2 or 3 hours after training, then you're going to have sufficient protein to give you the benefits of the stimulus that you provided in training. So I would say at a minimum, even for the people who like to intermittent fast, I would like to bookend the workout in particular. I also would recommend if you're going to eliminate a meal, if you're going to do some sort of 16-8, that you would eliminate dinner and you would keep breakfast. We see a whole host of benefits associated with breakfast. You have higher insulin sensitivity. You have you'll be able to absorb that protein. You need it more because you've just gone through a 10 plus 12-hour fast, depending on when you had dinner the night before. And it provides some satiety benefits where it's likely that you'll consume fewer calories in subsequent meals. And it also has a circadian rhythm benefit, some research for meal timing in that regard. So that would just be my recommendation. Now, having said that, whether you consume, if it's a calorie equation, whether you consume your calories in the morning or calories at night, should not have a significant impact on body weight. But now we're talking about things like hunger, sleep, insulin sensitivity, those kinds of things, which can contribute to the number of calories you eat. That can be relevant. And so that's just a recommendation that I would make to make the whole process easier. So I generally, for athletes, recommend 4 evenly spaced meals a day. The International Society of Sports Nutrition tends to support that recommendation. They think that 4 is a little better than 3 for athletes, but 5 is no better than 4. So this isn't a boost your metabolism sort of thing with small meals frequently throughout the day like we used to believe some decades ago. It's just for athletes, it makes sense to have smaller, more frequent meals. Smaller, 4 meals a day is what the ISN suggests is optimal. I wouldn't go under 3 for people that are competing.
Stan, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast, hearing me out and answering all my questions so thoroughly. Really, it's been an honor. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to bring this out and share it with everybody. Thank you again for taking the time out.
Thanks, brother. Sure appreciate it.
All right. That's a pod.